Well, the first place I learned to do darkroom work was actually here in the Morningside Gardens in the workshop. At that time, they had a darkroom set up. It was used by different people, but as a young teenager, I was apprenticing with Leonard Crane, who was a missionary who had come back to live in New York, and he worked at the council of churches in the neighborhood, and we repaired furniture and did pretty much any kind of fix-it thing, including tuning pianos. But one of the things he was also tasked with was making um, prints, large prints for exhibition up at the Interchurch Center, which is a few blocks away. And that's one of the probably the first time I ever got into the dark room, and it was a wonderful thing they had here with the workshop.
Mm. So, so what inspired you other than workshop, like to become eventually cinematographer?
Well, that's a big leap. I mean, when I started doing working for a production company in for summers in when I was in high school, but before that, I was fascinated with your uncandid camera. We would actually set out wallets on strings, little pieces of monofilament from my friend's house on 80th Street, and put it out on the sidewalk and film it from upstairs while people walked by and tried to pick up this wallet. And it was sort of funny to see how they would each react to the wallet. And even though you'd pull the string, they'd chase the wallet and actually pin it with their foot up against the building. And this was some of the first films that I did. But in high school, I got a job as a production assistant and an intern at a film company. And I actually did that for a couple of years. But then I branched off into still photography, probably for about 10 years or so before I got back into film.
Wow. So when you do filmmaking these days, what kind of camera? Because I just see like you have gigantic machine. Like what kind of camera do you do?
Mostly I'm working with the Sony cameras, but also Canon, the different FS7 cameras, the C300 cameras. It's pretty much any camera can. The cameras these days are so amazing compared to what you used to get, and just to get involved in the film business was so expensive. Um, Years ago, but now you can start making incredible films, as you can attest to on your iPhone.
Right. Yeah, what do you call? I'm famous by use iPhone. Yeah,
Well,
tell.
Green or the Tangerine was another movie that was shot on a iPhone
Yeah,
many years ago, and they did a
yeah,
great job. I think the lighting, but it's just unbelievable what you can get out of an iPhone these days. Not to mention some of the other brands, but mostly that's what I would be using.
yeah. There's a lot of it as your feature narrative film were made on an iPhone. Now you have done a lot of project. One of them is 1997. It is about what? It's about Americans' culture of crash. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I've did a lot of traveling, and I was always fascinated with traveling. And actually, when I first dropped out of high school, I went on about a 15-month walkabout, as we called it back then, hitchhiking through the United States and going into South America, and then coming back. And after that, numerous other trips, both to India and a lot to Mexico because I lived in California. So I was always looking at things sort of from an American perspective. I'd see things that are going on in these countries that were unique or different or appealed to me. And somehow I thought Demolition Derby was the oddest and strangest thing that was happening in America. And this would be a particular interest and entertaining in a lot of ways to people living outside the United States. I never did get international distribution for the documentary, but that was a certain way that I was looking at it back then. It was just this was a very unique and specific to American culture, and I don't know of any other culture that crashes perfectly drivable, usable cars, and for fun, and also
We have
it's
too
done.
much money.
What's that?
We have too much money.
Well, they do get very old cars, and
Uh,
it's done pretty much, as far as I know, in very rural environments. And in those environments, as you would see, if you want to watch it, anybody can watch this film, America's Culture of Crash. If you Google it, it's open to anyone on Vimeo. But many people would live in rural communities and have farms or workshops or garages where they would fix up the cars. So, in fact, when I had an old car upstate at one point that my father had left me, and it's finally stopped running, and I put an ad in the local paper that it was for sale for a couple $100. As soon as that paper came out, my phone, I had to turn my phone off. I got so many calls for people who wanted to buy that car. In the end, somebody came, and instead of 200, they only had 150 in their pocket and said, that's it. And I was like, okay, I'll sell it to you, but you have to write the names of my children on the side, as sort of a bonus for us. And we did go out actually to the Derby that year. It's a big thing in Walton, New York, and it's still going on. Um, and and so they ran it in the Derby that year. So it's really, they're taking cars that are, you might say, roadworthy, but they're really very old, and then they're just converting them in their own garages or on their farms. So it's not quite as decadent as taking like a brand new Tesla Derby car out there and just destroying it. But originally it started with just one derby every Friday night. Now I think they're running about four or five, and I'm still in touch with some of the people that are in the film, and some of the kids have grown
so
up.
in terms of these cars, right? And these people must not live in New York City, right? Like outside of the city,
Right,
because New
right.
York City people don't usually own a car.
Right. I think it's right. Exactly. In New York, you're absolutely right. Is one of the lowest ownership of cars in the nation. So it's primarily rural, and I know that they actually have a state derby at the state fair. So if you win your derby, your local derby, you can go to the state championships, and their prizes. I don't know what the prizes are up to. It's not a huge amount of money, but if you go all the way and you win everything, you definitely get something to keep you going for a while.
And then in 2005, you made a very personal project. It's called Our Holocaust Vacation. So would you like to tell us a little bit?
Sure, absolutely. This is also available on Vimeo. If you Google Our Holocaust Vacation, you'll see it. And it was a project about my mother's journey through the Holocaust. She's a Holocaust survivor who grew up in Lodz, Poland, and it was a big thing for her, to go back to Poland. We also didn't know what happened to her family. She's the only survivor of her immediate family, and actually, out of I think 43 first cousins, only three survived. So we went back to Poland to retrace her steps of where she had been, her life in Lodz, and how she had spent her life during the war, had been separated from her family, and then she had gone through Auschwitz into a work camp, and eventually was liberated in Mauthausen. So we were using her niece, Irena, who actually lived in your building and took care of my mother for the last few years of her life. But when she was only 16, focuses more about my mother's journey through Irena, because my mother was the age Irena was during the filming, which was 16 at that time. So um, it's a personal journey, and if it we look to find out what happened to my mother's family and where they were taken and how they were killed, and subsequently we were able to find that out.
Wow, that's amazing. I want to see that film. And as a matter of fact, I met your mom many times in our community, right? And she's a very, very sweet lady and very sophisticated. Yeah. And so let's go to your current project. And you wrote a book called Castro to Christopher, Gay Lives. It's Christopher and Castro, their streets, I guess, in San Francisco. So tell us a little bit about what motivates you to shoot so many photos of gay's life, AIDS life, and then eventually make a book of it.
Sure. Well, just for clarification, Christopher Street is in New York and Castro Street
Oh,
is
sorry. Sorry, I thought San Francisco.
that's okay. So at the time that after I left New York, when I dropped out of high school, I ended up about a year later in San Francisco, where I formed a arts commune with my brother and a few friends. And part of the commune was dedicated to international culture and travel. So people who were living in the commune were either artists or musicians, pretty much completely, but also interested in traveling. So I did a trip to India for almost a year through India and Europe. And when I came back to San Francisco, Harvey Milk and Mayor Moscone were murdered. Many people are probably familiar with with that and the movie Milk. So that made me very acutely aware of what was going on in the gay community at that time. It kind of burst a bubble for me, because up until that point, I'd always thought of San Francisco as being a very forgiving place. I mean, we were completely long-haired, crazy dressing hippies. And even though while traveling around the United States and hitchhiking at different times, I'd been hassled or challenged to fights, I always felt San Francisco was very accepting, and this sort of popped that bubble. And directly after I came back, they started this murder took place, and there were protests that I started going to and photographing at, and it was through that process that I got more involved in what was going on in the gay community, and found it was actually an incredible explosion of culture, humor, energy, and life. And really, as things progressed, it seemed to be a detente between the police, because directly after the murder, there was a lot of upheaval. And so I started just hanging out in these communities, because I was doing a lot of street photography, and it was just a very happening place to be. So this was really just done on my own interest. And then my brother, who had been living in South America for a couple of years, came back, and he was very interested in our anthropologist named Tobias Schneebaum, who wrote "Keep the River on Your Right." And he had lived in the Sepik River of New Guinea, and also in the Brazilian Amazon, with different gay tribes. And my brother interviewed him and wrote an article that was published in The Advocate at that time. And my brother looked at some of the work that I was doing, and he said maybe The Advocate, which was the national gay paper, would be interested in some of this work. And so I sent it to them, and they were. And they published actually a few different portfolios. And through that kind of inspiration, I also went down to the Bay Area Reporter, which is a local San Francisco gay paper, and showed them a stack of photographs. And they became interested, and were publishing a weekly photograph as well. So this gave me a little bit more of an impetus to directly try to cover different places. For example, Provincetown, Fire Island, New York. I was already at that time coming back to New York City and photographing on Christopher Street. Actually, before that, because I lived in New York, and I would come back quite frequently. And I just found it an incredibly moving and interesting neighborhoods to be in. You never knew what might be happening. You could be walking down the street, and there is, or visiting the Castro on a certain day, and there would be a tricycle race of drag queens. Or you could find somebody dressed up in a little leather outfit with a little leather dog. So it was just much more interesting than sort of the general neighborhoods. This first photograph that you're showing is one of the earlier pictures that I took, which when they were still having demonstrations after, this must have been from 1979, after the Mayor Moscone and Harvey Milk were murdered. So this is one photograph from one such gathering, and they were quite politically active at that time. This is speaking to the point which I was just discussing, is you just might not something you would not see somewhere else. There was a lot of cloning going on, people just being their free selves, doing what they wanted to do, and this is just a scene that you might see going on in the Castro at that time. Banks, these insta banks, were just a very new thing to the cash machine had just come out, but people dressed as they wanted and pretty much did what they wanted on Castro Street.
Is Castro Street in West Village?
No, Christopher Street is in the West Village. Castro Street is in the Castro neighborhood in San Francisco.
Oh, okay, okay. Okay, I get a little confused. All right, yeah. Okay, here we go. That's the wait, cover? No.
Yeah, that's the photograph
Yeah.
I chose for the cover of the book. This was actually at a Pride parade in San Francisco, and this speaks to some of the things that I'm very interested in photography, ambiguity, juxtaposition of different people and or objects, lighting, gesture, um, and so that's pretty much why I chose it for the cover. This is also in the Castro. This is on the corner of Castro and 17th Street, and um, it was just a very interesting place to be with a lot going on.
Is it 19 late 70 to 80, early 80 in America? Do people stereo like people generation they look down gay community, or they're pretty acceptable, especially in San Francisco and New York City?
No, gay were very much persecuted and ostracized throughout the United States in many different ways. I mean, they established certain enclaves in certain areas where they could, well, even in the San Francisco at that time, you don't see it in that many photographs, but people would wear a whistle because if they were being attacked, that was a system that they had devised for attracting attention to what was going on and for protection. In the commune, we actually had some of our commune members at different times were gay or lesbian, and I didn't hear of anybody. They didn't complain about getting beaten up or anything like that, but it was definitely happening, and there was persecution all over the country to a huge extent, and they were, very much vilified. I mean, it's hard to really understand. There's a fantastic introduction by Jim Farber to the book that talks about the changes in the political ground that's been covered, even though there's a lot of backlash right now within the certain red states and the Republican, community. There is so much, so many gains that have been made politically up to this point, that it's really kind of hard to fully understand. But at that point, the hippies were much more accepted and idealized in a certain way, and there was a certain amount of harassment that I'd experienced from police or hitchhiking through certain areas where people would challenge me to a fight and got offended by my long hair or being anti-war. But I think the gay population had that in droves. They had that and more. And just to be able to be out, I think in much of the country would be, I don't know about suicidal, but be very difficult, if not impossible. So San Francisco became an enclave, as did New York, and there were a few others around the country. But Jim speaks very well to that in his introduction. This photograph was one of the early days of Halloween. At that point, Halloween was not a parade yet. It was just people walking around and milling about on Castro Street on the sidewalks. Eventually, what I'm also interested in is how so much of gay culture has entered mainstream American culture. So now, if you go down to the West Village for Halloween, it's like this enormous event. It's hard even to get close to the police barricades And even my friends in the Midwest tell me that drag shows are some of the most popular things going at this time, and they're all over the place. And I think that that's probably partially why some of the more Bible thumping parts of the community in the right wing areas are very threatened, because it actually has entered mainstream American culture, and this is what is so wonderful and makes makes our culture a little more interesting and lively, because it was it was a lot of interesting things going on, and this was kind of the seeds of where we are now.
That's the same thing, right?
This is also
Oh,
on Castro Street, so this is something that you just may have come across, and one of the reasons why it was just such a wonderful, lively place to be and to photograph, and why I'm so thankful that I was very accepted in the community. Never had any bad backlash. People were seemed happy to be photographed in a lot of cases. I mean, usually I photograph very candidly, and prefer not to be noticed, but it was hard not to be noticed as a 6'4" guy with a camera. And particularly, and this is one case in point where actually there's this series of a few photographs of them just walking down the street, and then they saw me photographing, and then they just
oh.
posed for me.
And you were using what kind of camera? Because these are black and white, and also filming, right? These are films.
Yeah, this is all taken a black and white Tri-X film, which is a process that I learned through my teacher Hank Wessel when I first arrived in San Francisco. I met actually Larry Baer, who was a friend of my brother's, and he had studied with Gary Winogrand. This photograph is looking down Christopher Street on a hot summer day, with the sun. Christopher Street had a different vibe than Castro Street. Of course, New York was more gritty. And it had the pier, the dilapidated pier at the end, which was just such a fantastic place to be. It had beautiful end of daylight because it was facing west, of course. The cool breezes off the Hudson River, and it was something about the quality of that light. This photograph was taken near the end of the day, that would make it a great time to go out and walk around. But even then, on Christopher Street, people, you can see, are pretty much doing what they want to do and being their full, authentic selves, as we now say. But when I first got to San Francisco, I met Larry Baer, who we became very close friends, and he became a mentor to me, and he introduced me to Henry Wessel. We called him Hank. Hank Wessel is a fantastic photographer and fantastic teacher, was teaching at the San Francisco Art Institute. And Larry had studied with Gary Winogrand, actually, who was, of course, a very, very influential photographer of the 20th century when he was in Texas at, I think it was the University of Austin. And Gary Winogrand had suggested to Larry to go and study with Hank. And so Larry initially took me under his wing and helped me build the darkroom, and showed me some of the rudiments of photography, but also took me into Hank Wessel's class. And at first, I was very, very quiet in the class. This is another photograph of Castro Street, and but I was very, very serious about photography, and maybe a little bit intimidated by Hank, because I felt he was I really looked up to him. And at the end, he would have a 3-hour studio class, and at the end of the class, he'd say, "Does anybody have any more photographs to put up?" Because that's how the studio classes work. You'd put up your photographs, maybe 20 photographs, and people would talk about it. And if there was time left over, he would just show slides of historical photographers of interest. And so one day I just brought in a box of photographs, and he said, "Does anybody have any more photographs that they want to put up?" I said, "Hank, could I put up some photographs?" He said, "Of course." And from then on, I really became just a member of the class, even though I was not enrolled in the school and paying tuition. But it was something, as my father said, education is the one thing that people never really always want to get their money's worth. So I was getting an incredible education for nothing. And eventually, Hank suggested that I apply to graduate school. which I did under his mentorship, and eventually did get a graduate degree. This is I can't. Let's see. I forget where this was exactly. Oh, this is also, yeah. This is not on Castro Street, but in the Castro neighborhood. This I like this photograph a lot, and the reason why I like it is because it's a photograph. I wouldn't say of nothing because it's of two people, but it's not of three drag queens or not of something that is overtly special and attractive in that way. It's just, I think they might be waiting for a bus. And to take a photograph, and this is where Hank Wessel actually was absolutely amazing at taking photographs of things that were not necessarily dramatic or of obvious interest, and making a good image. And so I love the way there are shadows of three people, but the two people are there, and the one person looking off. And this also speaks a little bit to the intersectionality of the gay community with a local community that was living there at the time, and how they reacted to each other. And I also like the way the shadow on the right hand part of the photograph is sort of imitating a profile of a Mayan head.
Yeah, very nice. I noticed that at first. Yeah, and this is some kind of parade.
This is the first AIDS rally, Candlelight rally, that took place in San Francisco, and it was a big thing because at first, AIDS was infiltrating in the community, but it was not acknowledged to such a degree, and so this was the first Candlelight um, march and demonstration, to bring AIDS awareness to the politicians, because very little was being done. And this was unfortunately created a huge reactionary um, backlash against the gay community. If this, if AIDS hadn't happened, who knows where we would be now. But at that time, there was some very, very reactionary um, politicians, George Bush Sr., and Anita Bryan, and it was considered like the gay cancer, and it was really horrible that more support was not given sooner. So this was the first Candlelight vigil.
That's nice that creates these black and white little folding cups or whatever. It creates this contrast with the sky is black and they're lit up. So that's very nice.
Yeah, yeah, they had to put the candles in there so they wouldn't blow out, and I don't know exactly how many thousand people marched, but it was a big thing. But it still took a number of years till ACT UP was in full swing,
Uh-huh.
which I think was in 1986, when they really started to make some very, very heavy protests, and get the attention that was needed.
Yeah, that's a very close shot.
Yeah, yeah. There was frequent events. There were happenings. There were often a lot of people gathering, and it was great to just be a part of it and witness it, and to be able to get close to it, um, and just see it, because I personally think it's a piece of history that is going to live on for a long time. It's Stonewall is credited with being the beginning of course, when the gay liberation movement, but I think that really came into its own, and for a little while there before AIDS and after Stonewall was this. I just happened to have been there. It was really a coincidence, but just to feel the spirit of the time was very, um, I think, historic in retrospect. Now it's fantastic. I mean, in my building, there are numerous gay couples. They have children.
Yeah,
I see people walking in the neighborhood, um, from time to time, same-sex couples holding hands. But back then, you really had to be in your neighborhood to feel comfortable doing that.
yeah, that's so nice. And what are they doing?
Well, that's a good question, and that's partially why I find the photograph interesting. I mentioned before ambiguity. Photographs are interesting because they're contradictions. They both accurately describe what's going on, but they really tell you nothing about what is really happening. So you can see what the light looked like bouncing off of your subject, but by putting things in a frame, leaving things out of the frame. I mean, for example, there could be an entire circus just out of the picture with 25 elephants all standing on top of each other. But if you don't see it, you don't know what's going on. So it's isolating certain elements of the world and organizing them. And so in that way, I call it a lie and a truth. So it's a truth, but it's really a lie. So in fact, if this book it says gay streets of America, but how do we really know what the sexual preference is of anybody unless you really talk to them? So it was very difficult to put together a book like this because it was not assembled and created in a documentary style. In other words, if I was doing it with a film camera and I could interview people and they could tell me how they felt, you could really get a deeper insight into their personalities and what they're thinking. So another part of photographs, which are in some ways a little bit like gemstones, are that there are different aspects to what they allude to. So this is something is going on, but we don't know what. And it is an implied story that could be interpreted in different ways. But that's, I guess, why I found that particularly interesting. But
Yeah,
it's
you can imagine.
What's that?
You can imagine the darker guy, he's playing something, maybe he's holding a boombox, and to me, just I'm imagining in my ear that he's playing something.
Right.
While he's
Right.
walking.
Most likely he is, and most likely it's not classical music.
Not Beethoven.
But we don't know. But this is all to me, what makes it interesting.
Yeah, and you'll never guess. Gay people actually they love operas. Some opera fans, they were like a loyal gay men, and they know inside out of romantic operas. They know the words, and they listen to opera with the score. So very interesting. Anyway, let's see. Yeah, this one is some kind of a parade or
Well,
something.
this is Pride. This is New York Pride, and
Mhm.
it's just a scene, and it just shows again. It's a juxtaposition of different people, and shows just some of the joy and the feelings. It is. I think if you look at the pictures, it's a generalization, but the vibe of the New York and San Francisco are different, and the New York seemed a little bit more politically, oriented, and San Francisco seemed like it was a little bit more of general fun. For example, you did back then. Mayor Koch was leading the parade, and I have a photograph of him actually leading, the Pride Parade. So they did a sit down in New York in front of St. Patrick's Cathedral, because, of course, the Archdiocese of New York and the Catholic Church was very, very, anti-gay, and so there was a sit down in front of the cathedral there, and it just seemed to have a little bit more of a political overtone. But this is and I think that is evident in some of the photographs.
Wow. I also went to made a video in New York, the Pride. I would say like before COVID. Yeah. So it's like a very fun. Wow, look at that. Some kind of a beach.
Well, this is the end of the Christopher Street Pier, and it was a great, great place to hang out, and it was incorporated into the gay community. But many people of well, all kinds of people, and not necessarily gay people, would hang out there. And unfortunately, it's something that New York has lost, because everything has been built up, and everything is so. sort of proper and regulated, but you can see how this pier is just crumbling. But people would, you know, who couldn't afford to go to Fire Island, perhaps, or who just happened to be in the city, would go out and sunbathe. And there was actually nude sunbathing, and I think even some, sex. But it just shows the crumbling nature of what is going on, but how it is treated in some ways a little bit, as Jim writes in his introduction, like the French Riviera.
Yeah, I'll tell you a little bit about when I grew up. 1983 or even before, being a gay in China is like a crime. Like they actually put you in prison. Yeah, the government. So it's a very how do I say, Chinese people still to this day, when I talk about gay musician, that I want to promote, and they'll say, "Oh, don't tell, don't tell."
Right.
Yeah, yeah,
Right.
still
Right.
very.
So Pride has not come to China yet.
No, definitely not, definitely not. Do we have another set, or this is it?
No, there was, I sent one other set
Okay,
of images as well.
now let me go in there because let's see. Okay, this one. Oh yeah. Oh, this one, it comes with the same picture ended here. Oh no, never mind. Okay, let's see. No, this is.
It was a different file.
Oh, okay, okay. Um, yeah. Let's see about this. Yeah, right now I have the same two files. Let me see if I can find it. So yeah. Now, what what kind of audience you're looking for? Are you looking for is your audience only gay people, or people who are open-minded and accepting, um, uh, LGBTQ?
Um, my audience is anybody who's interested in looking. It's obviously very much related in content to the LGBT, TQ, but it's also, I hope, for people who are interested in photography. And I think more than anybody, people who are maybe anti, gay should look at this and just see what's going on, because it's not. I was not so much interested in the fact, actually, when I was started taking the pictures, as that people were gay, but they were just people just doing great things in terms of their emotional output, being themselves, the way they were acting in the street. It was, very lively, a lot of humor, and the culture that they were just bringing to their community. And so that's compared to many other gay photographers who have covered the same subject matter. I think I'm looking at it in a slightly less sexualized manner. So I was not. Of course, I'm always attracted to outward displays of affection, and it's, just a wonderful thing, but it wasn't so sexualized. So, for example, I didn't go into the the clubs and bars, even though I did go into some of the bars. But for photographing there, I felt very intrusive with a flash, and it was just, I was not really interested in that. But really, what was going on in the street, and that's pretty much how I approach all my work. Is I mean, I do have some personal work, and I did photograph in the Commune as well, but generally, it's what's going on in the public eye. Um, so I'd say my book is for anybody who would like to take a look, and hopefully, as I mentioned just in my statement, it's just to have a walk through a place and time, through, through my camera lens of what was going on, and hopefully I can portray, the vibe and the feeling of what was going on in those streets then. So in some ways, it's a very hard thing to do without words, and just using photographs to convey that, because
Right.
Because a photograph, as I
Yeah.
mentioned, is not so specific as to talk about those things. So it took a long time to put together the book.
It's a it's a silent right silent what do you call silent storytelling, much more difficult than when we make film, right? That,
Right.
like you said, you have music, you can use music to create a mood, you can interview people, you can narrate. So there's a much more dimensions you can add on. So did you see this?
Yes.
Okay, all right.
So
So
this
tell me.
was a just before I always for me photography and travel dovetail together. Before I was really photographing, although I'd done a little bit in high school and as mentioned, worked with Mr. Leonard Crane, the ex-missionary in the darkroom, and also of course I have to you mentioned my father, he was also a cinematographer, and he showed me some of the books of Henri Cartier-Bresson when I was a kid, and actually I think he was the first one to develop some film for me in the bathroom, just to show me how that was like really amazing. You know, when you travel, for the most part, or at least when I travel because I'm interested in seeing other things. I'm interested in seeing new things. My eyes are open. I'm aware, and a lot of the time I'm in the moment. So that's sort of my objective, is just to be in the moment, be observational, see what's going on around me. So after the first trip, my lengthy trip to South America for 15 months, when I had gotten out of high school, then I started getting into still photography, and it was really an extension of the same thing. So it's when I photograph, I like to be in the moment. I don't look per se for something specific. I do bring myself to certain areas of places where I am, where I think that maybe the light is better. I love to photograph people, so to go to desolate neighborhoods is not really what I would want to do. So going on a trip to India, this was the first long trip I did where I didn't have to work at anything else, and I could just get up and photograph and look around. You know, through much of the day. And India is also a fantastic culture, a fascinating culture. There's a lot going on uh, in the streets, and this allowed me well, I was in India for about 5.5 months, and then traveled overland through Pakistan, actually Iran, Turkey, and then into Europe. So this was just before I started on the project that was incorporated into the book of Castro to Christopher Street. This was a photograph taken in Puri, India, which is a wonderfully interesting place because there's both local fishermen and there's pilgrims and there are tourists that all frequent the beach in Puri, and it's just a wonderful place to spend some time. Um, and there's Jagannath Puri, which is a very famous Indian temple nearby as well.
Sorry, I muted myself. So the person seems like on top of the wind, or is it a illusion?
On top of the what?
This wing looks like a, three win, WIN, win,
Wind, yeah.
like
Well,
a airplane.
they're fixing their nets. These are the nets they use for fishing, and they're fixing, repairing, so what really fascinates me most about photography, or many things fascinate me, but the way, you know, three-dimensional reality is turned into a two-dimensional image, and that is ultimately the unique alchemy of what's involved in picture taking, and so that's the fascination with people. Even now they shoot something on their iPhone, they just want to see it, you just want to see it. And so it's much different with digital than it was with film. So with film, for example, when I went to India, and I was there for probably about 160 days, and I only had about 160 rolls of film. So, that's probably as much as I could, shoot on my phone, like walking to the store. But you had to, ration what you're shooting, and you didn't even see what you were getting until much later. Um, and that can be problematic if you have any kind of a camera issue or something like that. But it's a different way. I'm still not getting used to digital, although I shoot digital now. But there's always a tendency to just want to look at what you've shot and to see what you got. And it also, I find, and this is part of the teachings of my teacher Hank Wessel, that you should just let after you photograph, just leave your work, he would say, for a year before would start printing. And in the case with the Castro to Christopher Street, it was about 40 years. But when you initially take a picture, you're attached to what you saw in your memory. So you can't really separate yourself. And it takes some time before you can look at it. Maybe other people could do it, sooner. But for me, there's always this remembering of what you saw. And sometimes you think, oh, there's an incredible situation you photograph. It's got to be a great picture. And you look at it. And unfortunately, I have many, many boxes of terrible photographs that I did exhibition prints of, thinking that they were wonderful. Some were good. Some were good. Sometimes you do recognize the good ones right away, but often it takes some time.
Yeah, Dr. J is asking what digital camera is closest to the 35 millimeter experience.
Of shooting film.
Yeah, in audience, they can ask questions. Yeah.
Sure. Well, there's a lot of digital cameras that show the same frame as the 35 millimeter frame, so you can get that frame, but the grainy look you don't get. I personally am trying to work with digital now because I just see it as the problem with shooting film. And I've seen friends who are coming out of film school or studying photography, and they're told, go shoot some film. Well, you really need to shoot a lot of film to start to understand the alchemy of how the three-dimensional reality is turned into two dimensions. So their assignments are like, shoot 2 rolls of film. Well, 2 rolls of film will not do it. You have to shoot 200 rolls of film or 2,000 rolls of film. And this becomes a difficult process. So in some ways, I could say any digital camera. Well, I guess the ones that I would allude to more are that do not have a reflex. They are, for me, when I was shooting film, I was using Leicas, and Leicas are rangefinder cameras. They're very small cameras. They because they're not SLRs and you don't look through the lens, you generally use wider angle lenses. You don't use zooms. I never had a zoom lens on a Leica, and I didn't really use telephoto lenses. So it's a way of sort of an extension of the eye, and that's how I would use it. So when I would walk around, I would want something that recorded very closely what my eye was seeing, and I could operate very quickly. I wanted a small camera and something that was fairly unobtrusive. So now they're digital cameras that are made that are not rangefinders as well. For example, the Sony, A7 series is one, but they're different ones. And if you want something that's going to replicate film, you want a full size 35 millimeter sensor, and you want something that really is more like a rangefinder.
Great, thanks for the explanation. All right, so move on.
Yeah, this is another image from India. That same trip. This is another.
Nice.
We basically spent about 5 months traveling, about $3 a day, sometimes sleeping out, but sometimes mostly sleeping in very dive hotels. But it was just the beauty of being able to be completely in the moment. I can't say I was completely in the moment, but you didn't have to think about any day-to-day chores or working for that matter. I mean, we had a kind of a goal, which was to collect artwork for our gallery to be sold in our gallery, and we did bring some things back and send some things
Who is
back.
we? Who
Well,
is
I
we?
was part of the Modern Lovers Commune at that time, and this was the group that was created with my brother and a few other friends in San Francisco when I arrived in San Francisco, and we had a gallery, and it was called Ancient Gurrent's Gallery, and the gallery had a variety of shows, photographic as well as sculpture, and people used it as a performance space, used it for poetry readings, musical events. I mean, it started off as a crash pad. That was, I mean, to give you an idea, I arrived there at the end of January, and it was 1975, January, and the first thing I noticed on one of the shelves was a pumpkin, and the pumpkin was left over from Halloween, and nobody had cleaned it up, and the pumpkin had shrunk from a circle down to just half a pumpkin, and it was just decomposing, and it was inhabited by art students that went to the San Francisco Art Institute, but quickly we realized that it was a waste of time for everybody to have their little thing of food in the refrigerator separated, and you couldn't do this, you couldn't do that. So some of us just decided, well, why don't we just start a commune? And it was a very small commune, and we built a dark room. I built a dark room downstairs in the basement. We also had a music room, which was fairly soundproof. I can't say it was completely soundproof because one night at about 1 o'clock in the morning, a neighbor threw a cherry bomb out the window that exploded because they were sick of hearing the loud. We were very into well, rock and roll, but also jazz and free jazz. So we had a film editing room, and we had the gallery, and we did nightly communal dinners, and many people, mostly artists and other friends, would just happen to stop by around dinner time, and they were always welcome, and always received with open arms. So that was it took a kind of a couple years. It was started by Nancy Hedin, who was named Strut actually, and she mounted a show and one day and wrote Ancient Currents Gallery on the wall with motor oil. And as my brother insists, it took about 2 years of trying to paint over the motor oil, but eventually we,
Motor oil. You mean
yeah.
leftover oil?
I don't know where she got it, but she had the only vehicle that we had at that time, which is a Camino, and so she just used it, and it just made this sort of weird, paint on the wall, but very hard to cover up. And that was really the beginning. And Nancy lived there with her partner. Uh, well, we called her Strut. I never ever called her Nancy, but that was her name, Donna. But she lived there with Donna, and they had a little room in the basement, and that was the beginning. We just started doing shows and using the space and cleaning it up, and it was kind of an ongoing project to better it. And so part of what we did was travel. So this was one of the trips that I went on, and eventually did have a show at the gallery when I came back, and also was sending artwork back.
How fun. Do you play musical instrument?
I did for a long time. I played the trumpet. I played the trumpet.
Cool. I was just thinking when you're talking about how fun your youth was, like compared to today's world, people just look at their gadgets in their room,
Yeah.
communicate with the people they probably will never see each other in their whole life.
Well, we actually didn't even have a television probably for 3 or 4 years. Eventually, we did get one, probably from the free box. We did a lot of what we called dumpster diving, or on let's say Monday when garbage night, we'd go around and pick up furniture or other things that we could use for the house. But Yeah, I really, there's people talk about certain things that were on television at that time, and I just, probably didn't watch anything, for maybe 3 years or more. So everything had to be in person.
Mm, so much fun.
We also had a house painters co-op. That
Oh,
well, first, we called it the International House Painters Co-op, but after a while, people, it sounded a little bit like Here Today, Gone Tomorrow. So we changed it to, my close friend was named Nicholas, also Nick. So Nicholas and Nicholas. But so people could work, there's a lot of houses to paint in San Francisco.
mm,
The gallery never made very much money, but we didn't need much money. A matter of fact, the rent, I think when we first moved into the entire space, which um, ultimately probably 10 of us were living in, was about $200.
mm.
And
Wow, wow, that's amazing.
so these are all photographs that you're going through from India, different, different places and different, actually, I ended up going back to India a couple of times
Oh,
for jobs when I got professionally involved in documentary, working for the Relief and Development Agency. CARE was one of them. And also,
mm.
this is in Goa.
Yeah, you also worked for HBO, right?
Some projects I've worked. The Janes is out now. It's on HBO. We did some shooting on, and they're working. Actually, I'm not supposed to talk about a current
Mm,
project, which is going to be coming out in the fall. But
mhm.
from time to time, yes, I have worked on some stuff that's shown on HBO.
Yeah, so fascinating, fascinating. And we should be ending pretty soon. And anybody else in the audience, do you have any questions for Nick? And while you're writing your question, I probably would only take two. I have a question for Nick. Is when you are a visual person, I guess more visual and photographer. So how do you deal with everyday life when you go on street or when you go on event? When you have no camera, do you always thinking you must capture? How does this process go?
Well, I always do have a camera because I always have my phone. So it's yeah. Sometimes you just see something that's particularly interesting. I mean, and there is a phone. The phone is pretty good, and I will try to use that. But things have changed a lot. I mean, one thing I was just noticing is even the signage. Like when you looked at signs, um, 40 years ago, most of them were hand painted or lettered, and there was a certain kind of organic feel to it. And what I do notice in photographing now, there's a lot of what I would call sign pollution. So there's so much branding, and people even put branding on their clothing, and it's all branding, and everything is like sort of corporate branding. And you take these photographs, and the branding tends to just like draw your attention to it because that's what branding is supposed to do. And it's really, I'm almost thinking about photoshopping out some of the branding in certain instances where I find it particularly annoying.
Right.
So I
I
saw there was a question, it popped up and it went away.
It's interesting. I had a question, and then I look at Anthony Scully. He asked a very similar question. He said, "If you see an interesting subject, do you wait for the perfect moment to have happen, or do you click the shutter as soon as you see it?"
Well, that's a great question, and the one thing that I think that I've learned from doing photography for a long time is you recognize the potential for a good photograph. So when I look at my earlier work, and you take like hundreds and hundreds of photographs of stuff that really you're like, wow, I don't know what I was seeing, but I was learning how reality changes into a photograph. So as I got a little bit more experience, you will see something that draws your attention and you feel like it has the potential to be a good photograph. So there are different ways that you can do it. Of course, you would want to catch, maybe you see something interesting happening, but it's not a fully developed moment. So you'll just kind of observe it without being too obtrusive. Um, and it's sort of a ginger, you have to just gingerly step around the situation. And it was different with film because with film, you didn't just like photograph Now you can put a motor drive on these digital cameras and just like, it's kind of crazy. It's also kind of another side of it is interesting that you can look at these different moments within that if you shoot with a motor drive and sort of you'll see stuff that you don't even see with your eye. But you can set yourself up in a position where either the light is good or something is happening. And generally, I feel like you wait for the moment. You wait for the moment. However, it's sort of like playing a musical instrument. You also need to practice. So the moments can be very fleeting. So when you're just walking around, taking a photograph now and then, even though you know, like, wow, this is not going to be like, the world's greatest photograph or even one of my better photographs, it's still a way for staying in practice and staying in tune with your camera. I tried working in automatic modes for some time and never. I just find that I still prefer the organic way that I've always photographed, which is I estimate the distance on my lens when I'm photographing of what I'm anticipating it to be, and that's as opposed to using automatic modes and stuff like that.
Yeah, so very interesting. I love photographer. Love photography. A few years ago, I think in 2017, I met someone who wrote a book and had 79 images of. He shot in empty land in Palestine. He's Italian, so I made a short film about that. It's called That Moment. So he talked about it's not this moment. It's not the other moment. It's that moment. So he uses Hasselblad, only Hasselblad to shoot. So one day he went outside and shot a whole day. So he came home and his partner was asking him, said, "So how was it?" He said, "Oh, very fruitful." And then the partner said, "How many did you shoot?" Two.
Right.
So I can relate to that story.
Right.
Anyway.
Well, the Hasselblad is a bigger camera. It's kind of the opposite. I mean, I was also I see the question there too. I want to Shark FinTech. I really want to talk about that question. But the Leica is a very lightweight camera. Partially, it just like carrying a lot of stuff around all day. It's just it's encumbersome. And the Hasselblad is like, but if you get something good on your Hasselblad, it's a fantastic negative. But people would joke because Cartier-Bresson said the decisive moment. Well, somebody else said, well, the decisive moment is when you circle something on your contact sheet. So any moment can be decisive. It could be a very banal moment and you can make it decisive, but it can also be a very dramatic moment and it can be decisive. So in answer to the question is, going back to Anthony's question, is wait and see what develops and see what happens, and don't walk away, because what I've learned over the years is that it takes a long time to find very interesting moments that you can photograph and that could lead to interesting photographs. And so just sort of stick with it, just observe it, and try not to be intrusive.
Yeah, thank you
So
so
I
much.
see this other question.
Yeah,
Uh,
sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think celebrity gay photographers like Robert Mapplethorpe did more good or more harm to the LGBTQ community? Um, yeah, I think sad how the controversy became about him and not his art. Um, you know, you have to be who you are, and particularly with art, there's no other way around it. So Mapplethorpe. Geez, I never really thought about how the harm he had done, but I think people that take umbrage to that are so close-minded that maybe they need to look at his art a little more and open up and be a little more accepting. But that is a question I really haven't thought um, that much about. Um, but that is interesting. Yeah, I would hope in the long term, for sure, in the long term, it did more good than harm.
Great. Well, Jacqueline Power has a question, or maybe a more comment. No question, just a thank you for being here. By the way, Jackie, next Wednesday, she will be interviewed by me. She
Great.
has great story. She was in the poker war. She worked for lawyers, and then she's a screenwriter and producer and everything else. So yeah. So Jackie said, have a introduction to go to my friend David Lykes Keenan, also a photographer and a big part of the art and LGBTQ community in New York City and Austin. Yeah. Anyway,
Great.
so we have to wrap up our session, and I will ask. Normally, I ask 10 questions about what do you call rapid fire. So I'm going to ask 3 or 4. Okay, would you like me to do a rapid fire with you?
Sure.
Really quick question, quick answer. Okay. All right.
Okay.
Ready?
Ready.
Uh, would you like to go to China to shoot photo or video?
Yes. Easy one. Easy one.
Okay. What is your favorite bagel?
Everything whole wheat.
Do you consider yourself retired in Morningside Garden?
Retired? No.
Like stay here forever?
Oh, yeah. Yes. I will live in Morningside forever, I think.
Okay. What else? What's your next big project?
Well, I'm potentially. Well, I'm thinking about some more travel trips, and I'm doing a little less cinematography, and trying to get more into my roots of still photography. I don't want to say too much more about that, but I'm also taking a writing class, and I would like to experiment with writing about travel with photography as well.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Do you have anything you want to add? We're over time, but it's been great
Yeah, I
conversation.
just want to. I'm so sorry about the mess up. I mean, it took me a little while to figure that out, but it was like playing on, and it was my fault. And I'm sorry for putting you through the stress and hassle. And sorry if people were delayed. And thank you very much for sticking with it. And and I'm glad I figured it out.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, I'm usually pretty calm about that because it happened before. I never really know why. So now I know at least the browser need to be closed. Yeah, so I wanted to do just the one, two little. Actually, I already did. Next Wednesday, 5 p.m. New York time. Jackie is going to be have a conversation with me here, and also we've been doing this for 200. How many times? 258 today. So
Wow,
next week we're
fantastic.
259. Yeah, I've been very consistently every Wednesday doing a show. My Yangon Diary is a film uh, edited on, oh no, shoot on iPhone 11 Pro. It's on Amazon. Also, I just put it a few days ago on YouTube channel, free of watch, free of advertisement. So check that out. And well, thank you so much, Nick.
I'll say one last thing. I've just put a pitch. We're doing a fundraiser for Housing Works on Crosby Street on the February 13th. It's at 6 o'clock. There's going to be, I'm going to be talking with Jim Farber, who wrote the introduction to the book. And we're just, Housing Works is a fantastic organization. And there will be, books for sale and for signing. And it's all to raise money for housing for people with AIDS.
Yeah, great. And just write me a one paragraph. So I'll put it in the chat below, the description below. Okay. So
Okay. Okay.
and I also want to add one more thing is Nick's book is on Amazon and where else?
Simon Schuster, I don't know, local bookstores, pretty much available. Online if you Google it, or I would say go to your local bookstore and ask them for it if they don't already have it.
It's great. Wow. Thank you so much. All
Thank you.
right.
Okay.
Yeah, we're going home.
Okay.
We're staying home. Thank you, everybody, for watching us and for listening to us. And yeah, until next time, and be well, be healthy, and keep creating arts. Okay. Bye now.
Bye bye.
Bye.